Well, hello everyone. It's Martin Lush here, Global VP for NSF Health Sciences. Welcome to the second or third of our free webinars for 2017. This one, judging by all of the interest, judging by the number of people that have dialed in, is of considerable interest to you, and for very good reason. This session is all about how do we go about changing GMP behaviours, and in doing so, changing quality culture. So, it's not really February, it's March, but this is the second one in our program for 2017. So thank you very much for supporting this program. Points to note, the usual one, folks. 30 minutes long, hopefully, short and sharp, recorded and available for circulation. We really do mean this. Please, the link that we send through to you, if you could make use of that and share this message, this webinar, with as many of your colleagues as possible. That's the whole purpose of this webinar program, is to help keep the industry informed and also to give some very practical tools and techniques in this challenging world that we all live in to hopefully make your lives a whole lot easier. So please share this link. Questions, any questions, please just email me, and as you all know, we will get back to you quickly. Please feedback on the webinar, because that's the only way that we improve. And please follow me on LinkedIn, because I write a lot of posts covering subjects like this with lots of practical tools and techniques as well. So aims and objectives of this webinar, ladies and gentlemen, is to really provide an overview in the short time that we've got on the science of behavioral change. And this is really important, because this is not just our opinion. A lot of the tools and techniques that I will be covering are really based upon some really powerful research and some powerful resources. We'll mention one already, David Halpern, the behavioral psychologist that designed and led the behavioral insights team for the British government, otherwise known as the Nudge Unit. David came up with a very nice way of remembering how to change behavior. In other words, if you want to change behavior, the new behavior has to be easier than the old one. It has to be attractive. There has to be something in it. It has to be social, and timing is also very, very important. Now, the second piece of research or basis of the model that we've developed is also based on the research done by Dr. B.J. Fogg of Stanford University, an eminent behavioral psychologist, who basically came up with a model to say, look, behavior at its simplest level is down to motivation, ability, or ease, and then to turn that into a habit. And what we've done at NSF is to combine those to come up with our own model that we have proven to be very, very effective, which we will cover as we go through this session, because what I want to do is to show you practically how you can apply these tools and techniques, and we're going to do that using a case study around repeat deviations. So, what doesn't work? Now, if you reflect on all of the sort of culture change and behavioral change models or initiatives that you've each been exposed to, I think many of these will resonate with you. Well, what doesn't work is when culture change is the focus rather than behaviors. I see a lot of discussion around culture change in the industry. There's a lot of conferences on culture change. The challenge, though, is that term is so nebulous. There's nothing really people can get their teeth into. There's no hard and fast, simple processes or rules they can follow. And that's why we prefer at NSF to focus very much on behavior change. And the model that we've created, which does work very, very effectively, is focused on changing behaviors. What we also know doesn't work, what I call podium statements, when our CEO or somebody who is eminent within the leadership team stands at a podium and says, from this day forth, things will change. Well, they do change for a little, but as we all know, that momentum typically dies focus tends to go on other things, and the initiatives, the projects, as they're often referred to, have their expiry period and they eventually die. What we also know doesn't work is when we start too big. One of the beauties, one of the benefits of the model that I'm going to share with you is that you can actually apply it on really, really small projects. And when you start to change multiple behaviors or habits within the organization, over time the culture then changes. What we also know doesn't work is when we start to focus on the old behavior rather than focusing on the new one. What we also know doesn't work is when you're focused just on the result rather than the ritual, the process, the habits that generate that result. And the model I'm going to give you is all about focusing on the ritual, focusing on the rules, and if you are disciplined in executing these rules, then the result will follow automatically. 6 is really, really important, ladies and gentlemen, because everyone is guilty of giving up too soon. Changing behaviors, there are some rare exceptions, which we'll cover later, but in most cases, it takes time. It takes patience. It takes disciplined execution of the rules, that ritual, or those rituals that we'll be talking about later. It takes time. And so often people give up too soon. And number 7 is really key. When you don't change the environment in which people are working, you are not going to change their habits, because the environment has a really, really strong trigger effect on behavior. I could have listed a few more, but they are really the key ones. But fundamentally, not surprisingly, because we all know this, you can't force people to do anything unless they really want to. There has to be there has to be the motivation. They have to be made able to do the new behavior. There has to be a trigger event to remind them that this is what they are now expected to do. And they, through disciplined, very precise practice, then actually repeatedly do that behavior because it actually becomes a habit. But fundamentally, you can't force people to do anything they actually don't want to do, which is not a surprise. Now, we all know in this changing world, and I did a post on LinkedIn about 6 weeks ago called Trump, Brexit, What Next? Living in an era of brutal disruption. We are going to have to change. We are going to have to do things differently. And all of those behaviors, those habits on the left-hand side, the firefighting, the complexity, the compliance, the training, death by KPI, and there are lots more. These are the habits that we're going to have to change. We have to change from firefighting to one of prevention improvement. We have to move from being obsessed with complexity to being even more obsessed with simplification. So this is why this session is so popular. It's why the course, we run a 2.5-day course that really goes into this in considerable detail, is so popular, because everybody's looking for those practical tools, those practical techniques that they can apply immediately. We're running this course for the first time later on this year. It's going to be hugely successful because we've run this dozens of times in-house for clients, and so many of them have transformed their quality culture by applying these tools and techniques. We had one client recently who said that it's the first session they'd ever attended where they all left with tools and techniques that are really, really simple to apply, that they could actually, something they could get their teeth into, something that they could hold on to. So what I'm going to do is to really present a summary of this course. There's the course link there if you're really interested in joining me in June in Manchester, when I will be personally presenting this session. The reason for emphasizing this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the tools and techniques have been validated. We've run this course so many times in-house for clients. We know that providing they are disciplined in execution, providing they stick with it and they don't give up too soon, these methods have been proven to work. And really, here's some examples, and this is really just to give you hope. I really want to get into your minds that these methods work. One of our clients reduced their deviation incidents due to SOP non-compliance by 62% in 8 months. Not 8 days or 8 weeks. They were persistent. They kept at it, because it's only through that persistence do you create the new habits that become stronger than the old habits, and the improvements then follow. One of our clients also improved aseptic practice by reducing the finger dab failures considerably. One of our clients also successfully got through an FDA inspection, having been issued a warning letter relating to data integrity. This client was particularly smart in knowing that it wasn't a technical solution, but more of a behavioral solution, and they applied the tools and techniques that we're going to talk about and got the all clear following a re-inspection. And a few months ago, one of our clients actually told us that they improved their BMR right first time from 72% to 99%. So their standard of documentation practice improved directly as a result of 2 things. One, the knowledge that we conveyed to them on the course, but also, and crucially, their persistence and dogged determination to actually implement. If you really want some bedtime reading, this is a really fascinating book. David Halpern's book, Inside the Nudge Unit. The Nudge Unit is the Behavior Insights team implanted, or it was, it's now been privatized, by David Cameron to implement government policy within the United Kingdom. Not just to implement the policy, but actually get behavioral change within the country. And it largely succeeded in achieving that aim. This is really just to emphasize that much of what I'm going to talk about has the credibility of research, has the credibility of science, and has the credibility of being proven to actually work. I mentioned this earlier. This is our adaptation of the FOG approach, our adaptation of David's approach, because at its simplest level, behavior really has 4 components. You have to be motivated to change. You have to have the ability to change, and that's not just knowledge, but you've got to have all of the barriers, the friction, the resistance to implementing the old behavior removed. You need a trigger event, something that actually reminds you, and then you need to practice precisely for a period of time so that that new habit strengthens, becomes stronger than the old habit until it becomes the most dominant one. So, in more detail, the motivation is all about giving people a reason for caring about changing their behavior, because changing behavior is actually difficult, it's hard, it's stressful, and it requires effort. So if you want people to put in that effort, there has to be a what's in it for me. They have to be given a reason for caring. They have to be motivated intrinsically. Then they have to be given the ability. That's not just the knowledge, the tools, the equipment, the procedures that are required, but crucially, it's about removing the barriers, reducing what I call the friction to implementing the new behavior. Because if you do not make that new behavior easier than the old one, why the hell should they change? Then there has to be the trigger or the reminder or cue, and then, as we said, you need to practice precisely, because it's through that repetition you establish the habit. And on the course we talk about the trigger, the routine, the reward, otherwise known as the habit loop. Now at NSF we developed a very simple 5-step process. We call it your 5 to drive. Step 1 is identify the specific behavior you must change. Step 2 is figuring out what is driving the old behavior. Step 3 is provide the motivation. Then step 4, focus on the ability. And then step 5, creating the habit. Step 2 is very, very important, ladies and gentlemen. I'll demonstrate why through the case study. understanding what is driving the old behavior is key. So often we launch into improvements and trying to change culture, trying to change behavior without stopping to ask committed people who are all there to do the best they can with what they've got, what's stopping you? So that diagnosis, step 2, is really, really key. Fundamentally, if you're not getting the desired behavior, it's either lack of intrinsic motivation, including social acceptance, that's really, really key, or it's too difficult, or there's no reminder, or you haven't practiced enough, resulting in the new habits being very, very weak. Or it could be all of these. Now, one question I have for you is, which of these is most powerful? Is it motivation? Is it the ability? Is it the trigger? Is it the habit? Most people get this wrong, and I actually got it wrong when I was posed the question. What research tells us is that the ability to implement the new behavior, in other words, having the knowledge, having the tools, having the techniques, and it being made easier than the old behavior, is actually the most dominant factor in this process, which is why for this webinar, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to really, really focus on how do you make people able to do the new behavior. In other words, how do you not just give them the education, but crucially, how do you make the new behavior easier? Because if you don't, they won't. There's some success stories here, and I'm really keen to emphasize these success stories because, this is not easy. There is a process that I'm going to give you, but it takes dogged determination, it takes precise practice, and precise execution of the tools and techniques that I'm going to cover. So you need to know that there is success around the corner, providing you actually do as I suggest. So, one of our clients, they approved, the success rate of approved changes improved from 23% to 87% in just 12 months. And that was achieved for their change control system by just changing 4 behaviors. Faster process through simplification. They changed their decision-making process to make it more objective by using an impact assessment form. The change leader drove the change behaviors, the change initiatives, and there was follow-up. So just by changing 4 behaviors, they dramatically improved business efficiency. Finger dab failures, I mentioned earlier, these were reduced by 77% by just changing 3 behaviors. The procedural compliance, consistency, and discipline. And the one I want to focus on for this session, ladies and gentlemen, is how one of our clients actually drove down repeat deviations by 67% in just 6 months, but it was 6 months of considerable effort and hard work. But you can see the reward there, £2.7 million in savings in 6 months. Now, this was 18 months ago, so one would think they've generated considerably more savings as a result since then. They achieve that through changing just 4 behaviors, 4 not ways of doing investigations, but 4 fundamental behaviors that have now become habit. First behavior, they did the Gemba. They went to the scene fast, literally within 5 minutes. Second behavior they changed was that they didn't focus on root cause, because as we all know, there is no such thing as root cause. There's always an error chain, multiple contributing factors. They changed the habit of looking at behavior, looking at deviations as bad news, to looking at deviations and problems as real learning opportunities. And they moved from a kappa focus to one of PACA, in other words, prevention over correction. So we mentioned earlier, ladies and gentlemen, the 4 components of behavior change: motivation, ability, trigger event, habit. Very quickly on motivation. Motivation is really, really key. It's not as important as ability. You can have really, really motivated people who then, if you give them a complex process to change, they suddenly become demotivated. Now, motivation, we all know now that the traditional carrot and stick form of motivation, which is, if you do this new thing, you will be rewarded. If you don't, you will be punished. We now know that doesn't work. All of the data indicates that old school thinking is ineffective. What we do now know about motivation is that there are four legs to this stool of motivation. One is you've got to give people purpose, you've got to give them the autonomy, and you've got to allow them to master the skills that you have provided them. And on the course, we actually go into this in a lot more detail because this is something that typically we are pretty bad at. Now, I'm not going to spend any more time on this because I really want to get to some practical tools and techniques as quickly as possible. A question for you, though. If you left a bowl of fruit on your dinner table at home or in the office, which fruit would be left until last? Well, not surprisingly, in most cases, it's the orange. Why? Because it's harder to eat. You've got to peel it. Another question for you. The American government, the US government, tried to, and is still is trying to encourage people to eat more healthily. So they put a simple, very visual prompt. The first one was on the left-hand side to remind people that for healthy living, these are the types of foods that you need to eat. And then they changed it to that plate visual on the right-hand side, which was most effective. Answer the one on the right, because it's easier to understand and therefore quicker to assimilate. British government, this is directly from David Halpin's book, they were trying to encourage people to insulate their lofts, so they gave them various tax incentives to do that, all of which failed. But what David Halpin then did was to say, look, we will provide help for you to clear your loft rather than to insulate it. And actually that was far more effective, because the one thing that was stopping, that picture on the left-hand side, by the way, is not my loft or attic, I hasten to add. Mine's not quite that tidy. But the point I'm making is that what prevented people from taking up the tax breaks and tax incentives was the thought of going into that loft space on the left-hand side and actually having to clear it. It's too much hard work. So what David Halpin and his group said, well, look, we will make it easier for you, and it was a lot more effective. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is that one of the key drivers in behavior change is that you have to make it easy, because people will always automatically take the line of least resistance. They will take the shortcuts. And that's why for this session, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to do is to focus on how do you make sure people are made able. In other words, you make it as easy as possible, and you give them the knowledge and the information to implement the new behaviors that you're looking for. So our 5-step behavior change model, if you're sat there, number one, say to yourself, okay, what specific behavior are you looking to change? The more specific, the better. Number two is figure out what is really driving the old behavior, where you are at the moment. Then you provide the motivation. Then you focus on making sure they have the ability, principally through brutal simplification. And then you make sure you practice the habit loop, as we do on the course, the trigger, the routine, and the reward. So step 4 is all about reducing friction. So as we are pushing people to change their behavior, the more friction they meet, the more resistance, whether it be procedural, systems, KPIs, the less likely they are to change their behavior. So we've got to make it really, really easy for them to do. Unless the new behavior is easier, they won't implement, they will not do. So, this was really underpinning one of the success stories that we had following our in-house course with this client, around deviations. And what we were aiming to do, many of you will have seen this, this is our deviation ladder. This is our ladder that really summarizes best-in-class practices for deviation and kappa. So if you want to remain competitive, if you want your deviation and kappa system to significantly drive continuous improvement and manage risk, you've got to get to rung number 9, step number 9. But you can only do that obviously by going through the preceding 8 steps. And what we did with this company is to actually work them through this, but in doing so, changing their habits as well. So just to give you some background, they had 7 manufacturing sites all making sterile products. They had major regulatory and customer criticism as a result of repeat deviations, 59% repeat incidents, 67% of those attributed to human error, primarily through convenience. It was easier to do that and to really do a more thorough investigation because, as you all know, human error is the starting point of an investigation, rarely its conclusion. Human error is the consequence rather than the cause of the mistakes. Nonetheless, they had 27 major observations in 3 years, and that really kicked in their motivation to change. These are some of the other characteristics. They had the magical, mythical 30-day rule for completion of deviations, which we all know is bad news because that just allows people too long, and it really conveys the message to people that these deviations are not important. The SOP was very complicated. Timelines were largely ignored, and as a result, they had lots of firefighting that inevitably resulted in a product recall. So that was the background to it, ladies and gentlemen, and that was the specific behavior they wanted to change. They wanted to drive down repeat deviation incidents, and we then spent a number of days on their site. We went through our usual diagnosis process to understand, whether it be through direct observation, open discussions using the Klein process, which we cover extensively on our course because this is a really powerful process when used correctly and intelligently, that really encourages people to tell you what happened. Open and questioning, active listening, walking the process. This all led us to finding out the causes of the old behavior. So remember, step 1, identify the specific behavior you want to change. Step 2, work really, really hard figuring out objectively, not through assumption or guessing, but through evidence and through direct observation, what is driving the old behavior. And these were some of the causes of why people were allowing repeat deviations to happen. Deviations were seen as there for compliance, which is crazy because we all know we have deviation reports for 2 reasons. One is to manage risk. The second reason is to drive continuous improvement. They were seen as QA's job. There was a culture of fear. They'd become slaves to TrackWise, and so on and so on. So we did a very extensive diagnosis of where they were at. There was lots more reasons why they were in the state that they were in. We don't really have time to go over these. I just want to emphasize step 2 is very important because it's these things that need to be addressed in the behavioral change. We certainly provided them with a motivation, and I'll give you a hint of how we did that in a minute. But what I want to do is to really get you to focus on the most important part of the behavioral change process, which is actually making sure you make the new behavior easy and considerably easier than the old behavior. Because ability what ability really means is making the new behavior easier, or you can make the old behavior either impossible because you engineer it out, or a lot harder or a lot more painful. And the ability also means giving people the tools, simpler processes, simpler procedures to follow, as well as the education and understanding that needs to support. Now, excuse me, for this particular company, complexity was a real barrier. They had a very complex SOP. They had multiple track-wise operations. They had multiple categories for deviations, which caused people to guess. They had so many tools and techniques, nobody didn't really know which one to use for the problem solving. They had no trigger events within the reporting of the deviations. So complexity was a key factor in the old behavior. So what we actually did, well, we basically took them through our simplification process, and if you haven't read the journal that summarizes this in considerable detail, let me know. I'll send you a copy of this journal. But as for those of you that did read it, you know that if you want to simplify anything, it really is quite simple. You get a group of small people, a smart group together, mainly of the users. You get them in a room so they're focused without distraction. You agree on the core purpose of what you're there to do. You process map the process. You apply our brutal thinking tools and techniques, and you don't give them quite enough time to do it. Now, that's a very quick summary of what this journal edition examined in more detail, but fundamentally, this was the simplification process that enabled them to change their behaviors. We then got them to agree on a set of rules for effective deviation investigations. Remember earlier I said what is really key is focusing on the ritual, in other words the rules, rather than the outcome. So what we said is, look guys, there's only 6 things you need to do to really do investigations effectively. Is number 1, you've got to report them immediately, within seconds. Number 2, you do the Gemba within minutes. You establish the facts from the assumptions. You do the risk assessment. You focus on the error chain and the effective CAPAs, and make sure your report tells the whole story, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So that was that was what we did as a part of making them more able. We'd motivated them. We had then moved on to making sure that the processes were simplified, and then we then moved on to making sure that they had the education to support that new behavior. So we talked about the product life cycle, where deviations fitted in. We talked to them about how to motivate their people to incorporate these new practices. We shared with them the deviation ladder that I shared with you to basically say, look, this is what your competitors are doing, so you can't afford to be left behind. We then shared with them their products and processes, the critical control points, what really mattered, what didn't. We shared with them a problem-solving toolkit, and we at NSF only use 4 to 5 really effective problem-solving tools. And at the end of it all, we certified their investigators. So this is the educational component of ability. And some of the key things that we got across is not to focus on root cause, think error chain, because we know that there is no such thing as a single root cause to deviations. We know that there's multiple contributing factors, what we at NSF call the error chain, often 10 to 14 contributing factors. These present the predictable pattern for each error. So if you can see the pattern, you can predict it, you can prevent the error or mistake from occurring. And what on the surface appears as human error, the contributing factors beforehand, sure, there's a few contributing factors around people, but the significant factors the investigation needs to expose are those beneath the surface, the contributing factors relating to process systems and procedural complexity, and ultimately culture and leadership. So these were the tools and techniques that we actually got across as part of making them more able. Now for the leadership team, we immersed them in the rules. They introduced a BlackBerry system at the time. They were using BlackBerries, this was a few years ago, where they got deviation crash teams. In other words, when a deviation was raised, BlackBerries would buzz, the deviation crash teams would go to the scene and do the triage, do the investigation. And the organization actually, as we would say, slaughtered some holy cows. They actually got rid of terminology that had been ingrained within the organization. They banned the term root cause. They got rid of their 30-day rule and other KPIs that were all driving the wrong behavior. They moved from a kappa to packer mindset, and they actually banned human error they removed human error in their track-wise process. So that really, ladies and gentlemen, was about focusing on making the new behavior easier and providing people with the tools and techniques. So in changing behavior and with it quality culture, remember, identify the specific behavior you want to change. Number two, step two, diagnose what is driving the old behavior. And on the course, we give you a lot of tools and techniques to do that, demonstrate how the Klein process can be worked. Number three is make sure you motivate people. You give people a reason for caring. You give them skin in the game, as we say, so that they are motivated to change. They can see what's in it for them. And on the course, we actually analyze that in a lot more detail so that you can come away with lots of really simple practical tools and techniques to use. Step four is the one that we focused on this webinar, ladies and gentlemen, is that you've got to make the new behavior easier. I keep emphasizing that because so often when we change behaviors, we just make it too difficult for people. We just put friction into the system. And of course, what are they going to do? They're going to go back to their old habits because those old habits were easier. So unless we make the new behavior easier, then they're not going to change. Now, one thing that we haven't had the opportunity of, ladies and gentlemen, to talk about is how do you habituate? Well, just very quickly, there are three components to what we call the habit loop. There is the trigger, there is the routine, in other words, the set of rules that I shared with you earlier, and then there is the reward that drives that behavior. So what did this particular group do to improve deviation investigations and timeliness? Well, the trigger, well, they had their blackberries alarming. They had a Klein process checklist, which we would share with you on the course. They used a customized impact assessment. They did the investigations real time using a template to drive consistency. And similarly, in all of their meeting rooms used for problem solving, they had a format and a structure on their whiteboards that they would follow. So remember, to habituate anything, you need a trigger event, you need the routine, which must be simple, no more than 4 to 5 steps. So that deviation and kappa routine, those rules that I shared with you earlier, was their routine. And if the rewards then drive that behavior then becomes a habit. And the measures must drive the right behavior. So often they don't. You know, the worst measure you can have on a deviation and kappa system is to encourage people, measure people, reward people to drive deviation incidents down. It has the opposite effect because what it in fact does is cause those incidents to be driven underground. So on the course we talk about this habit loop, we talk about how to create those routines, and we talk about how to create the rewards that are fit for purpose, those KPIs that drive that routine. So what I would implore you to do, ladies and gentlemen, is don't be left behind on this. The science is there. We understand more about behavior change than we ever have in the past. It has been proven to work. You know, the model that we will share with you, that we've sort of taken and extracted from David Halpern and the FOG model, that both of which have been proven to be extremely effective. We've simplified it even further to achieve these types of benefits. So I'd implore you, ladies and gentlemen, not to be left behind. I will be presenting this course in person on the 29th to 30th of June. If you can't make it on that course, please, you know, if you're interested in running a more detailed one-on-one session within your own companies, many of the successes that I've highlighted earlier are as a result of those internal, those customized courses. So, thank you very much for this short, sharp session on behavior change. ladies and gentlemen. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send them through to me. Follow me on LinkedIn because I write extensively on this, but please give me feedback. Any questions, send them through to me, and I always reply to them immediately. I really do look forward to seeing you on the course in Manchester in June, because this world that we're all living in is really changing fast, and our behaviours have to change very, very quickly. So you will leave with the knowledge of how to do that. So I hope this session has been useful in at least giving you not just a flavour, but also some really practical tools and techniques, and importantly to give you the hope, because others have achieved massive benefits from this session. So I hope you do as well. But if you have any more questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me. And if you need any more information on the course, I'll send it to you directly. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and look forward to seeing you in Manchester.